CitizenCon has finished and the vision for 1.0 has been cast. CIG have learnt some lessons from the past and they didn't really give us any dates, but this does leave us in a strange situation. We have no real idea of when any of the stuff that they showed is going to arrive. The major date in question is obviously 1.0, the release version of the game. When on earth should we expect it? I was on Space Tomatoes podcast the other day, and when asked that question, all of the guests gave wildly different answers. And I will tell you my best guess at the end of this video, and also I'd love to hear your predictions in the comments. But first, let's go through the main things that CIG showed us and use the clues and information, of which there are quite a few, available to us to create a best guess of when we should expect some of this stuff over the next few years. First up, we had all the planet stuff. Now, we saw a ton of information in here. We saw a lot of white box and some maybe grey box things, but we also saw a lot of slides. And whilst the kind of biome stuff looks really close in terms of the fact that it's basically finished, it looks visually stunning, there was a huge amount of content that they talked about in this panel that clearly was nowhere near being ready. All sorts of talk about how the planets themselves will have things like soil types and it will all tie into the quality of materials and minerals, all that sort of stuff. But nothing that we saw really was like a finished planet. And my guess is that this isn't actually as close as they may be made out in this panel. Things like global illumination maybe might sneak in over the next year or so. Maybe the Maelstrom stuff will get some early testing of that. But I would expect to see planets created using Genesis as a bit of a showcase next year at CitizenCon. The major showcase that we saw at the end, the weather stuff, I mean, the weather itself looks stunning. It looks done, but I would imagine they'll want to deliver that when they deliver full planets using Genesis. Next up, we have the social universe panel, all about basically bringing the MMO tools, communication tools, to life in a way that Star Citizen has been desperately in need of for ages. We talked about orgs, all sorts of stuff, but again, huge amounts of slides here. It was a slide fest. It was all mock-ups. There was nothing working. I think even the bit where they showed us the little chat box was obviously like this wasn't in-game or anything like that. This was a visual demo effectively to show us what it will look like. The only thing that we saw here that was probably pretty close was the VoIP updates. Apart from that, I would suggest that this stuff is significantly far away. The big thing obviously was the org tools, in-game org tools, and it looks brilliant. It looks like it will be a game changer for big groups, but I think there's a significant amount of this that maybe we'll see again at CitizenCon actually working next year, but I would be absolutely shocked if this stuff made it into game this year, considering all we've got really are some pretty pictures and mock-ups by artists. Next up, we have the Dress to Kill panel, which is all about effectively making yourself look pretty. And from a visual side, this looks pretty close. They obviously showed us lots of demos and demonstrations of different characters wearing different things. But again, notice the slide nature of all of this. We're getting blue bar dots that show us stats. And they have mentioned, I think, that there's lots more stats than this available, but this is not any sort of worked out system yet. This is, again, theory. This is the concept of what direction they want to go in. I don't think there's any real chance that we're going to get a full reworking and update to all the stats for all of the clothing stuff in the next year. I think that would be pretty shocking to get it that quickly. We also in this panel saw the sandworm stuff. Now, this is interesting because it's actual footage from people playing the game, from the devs playing the game. And I would say that although obviously in parts it looks pretty janky, that's obviously not particularly new for Star Citizen, I would think that this isn't crazy to get this in the next year. And this post from Zach Priest, who's working on this, basically saying that they've made a lot of progress on this and they've got no intention to lose momentum. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see this in a patch in the next year. I mean, I've got some serious questions around how fun just dumping bullets into the sandworm will be. I partly hope that they will take a bit more time to maybe come up with some more interesting mechanics. Obviously, the ground vehicles having to be there to draw it out is quite an interesting concept, but I wonder if something like having to use railguns or maybe dumbfire missiles to remove a scale from the sandworm to give it a weak spot that you have to shoot at with the rest of your bullets would be a bit more interesting, but that's for CIG to work out. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if we see that in the next year. Next, we had the Beyond Pyro panel, and obviously the first thing here was Nix. Now, Nix is a system we know that they've been working on for a while, and I think it shows. Even though this is grey box, the Delamar asteroid and Levski landing zone look pretty close to being finished, and so you might think that means it could actually probably drop in a patch at some point this year, and it could be the major patch for 2025, I think. Obviously, they didn't show us anything of the planets in the Nix system, and so again, tying back to the Genesis panel, I don't think their Genesis tech and their planet tech building stuff is ready to rock and roll yet. So Nix might come if they can get a kind of first version of Genesis pumping out the planets. Apart from that, we obviously then had this section on the municipal works, but again, notice the complete reliance on just slides. So this, I would think, would be many years away, potentially. We moved on to Castra. Again, I don't really understand what CIG means when they say pre-production. This, in some ways, looks, I mean, the planet side of things, the mountains and the kind of fog and clouds look incredible. But when you actually get to the base, you can see there's lots of textureless and just areas that obviously just look a bit kind of popped there to show us what it will look like. But I think Castra, there's no chance it's coming this year. Again, they've got to, looks like a big landing location that they've got to just completely start from scratch effectively. I would think that once they have pumped out the Levski location, I imagine it's the same team who'll be moving on to Sherman and getting that done, but I wouldn't think that will be that close. We then move on to the crafting stuff, and again, a significant amount of mock-ups and slides that tell us that it probably isn't that close. All the crafting stuff, they've given us kind of single examples of what things are going to look like. The amount of work to come up with stats and balancing for all of the items in the game, which is effectively what they're doing, is significant. Don't take the fact that we've seen some visuals here to mean that this is close. There's no chance we get it this year, and hopefully we'll see progress over the year in ISCs, and then maybe at next year's CitizenCon we'll see some actual things being crafted. Maybe we'll get some animations of the crafting machines working and refinery stuff, and who knows. But for now, I would not hold your breath to get this soon. And then base building is slightly different in that we're seeing in-engine base building. But if you think that CIG are going to release something with kind of UI that looks like this is clearly kind of programmer UI. There's no way that they're going to ship something that looks as basic as this. So there's significant work to do to get this working in the background. The drones that fly out of the machine thing, eventually we'll be able to see those drones fly out. That's obviously not happening right now. And also they talked about the fact that you'd have to make sure there's power between your different buildings, all that sort of stuff. The artwork, obviously, for some of the buildings that is fairly far along, but the actual mechanics and the engine side of things and the programming to get this all ready, I think it's unlikely that we get this year. It's quite depressing so far, but I think they've gone big here in showing us the vision of it, and they've shown us some really nice visual mock-ups again, that if you think these things that they're showing us here are actual working bases where things are really connected, this is some nice gameplay capture team work here where they've popped in the assets and then they've made ships fly around to make it look like it's actually a real base, but this is not ready in any way. There's not much to say about the ships really, but one of the goals for 1.0 is that all the professions will be in the game and they won't be tier 0. And you have to notice in the ships that they're working on that there is no Spirit E1, which is a passenger transport ship that we imagine will come as with the first drop of passenger transport. There's also no Legionnaire, which has been dropped. It was supposed to be done this year, but it's now not even going to be started on or worked on next year. So that means hacking is probably, that's the reason it's not come in so far. Hacking is not ready. And then also the Zeus MR, the bounty hunting variant, is nowhere to be seen, and bounty hunting has gone off the radar, and they have said actually that they're not currently working on it. So that's an idea of the amount of work to get to 1.0, which we'll talk about in a second, that we've still got, because there's a lot of professions that are not in the game and they're not going to be worked on for at least the next 12 months from a ship side of things. And then the big one, 1.0. This is the fun one. First thing to talk about is the main story. And so the main story in some ways doesn't sound like something that will have to take too long. But when you consider the fact that it's going to take you around the 5 systems, of which the 5th one, as we haven't talked about yet, is going to be Terra, and the fact that CIG probably won't move on to kind of cinematic type stuff in the main story until Squadron 42 is out, because their focus obviously is on Squadron for the next couple of years at least. I think the main story might be one of the last things to be ready for 1.0. And we mentioned Terra. Terra Prime itself is one of the major kind of locations, and the landing zone is going to be significant. And we just saw these very small bits of concept art here. The landing location itself is going to be a big job. If you assume that they're going to work on Nyx, then do Castra, then do Terra, is it crazy to say that this could be 4-5 years away? I don't know. Maybe I'm being pessimistic there. They mentioned more instance content, and I think this is quite interesting to see how they go about this. Talk about fleet battles, FPS operations. Will they manage to get this in relatively quickly? Because currently they keep dropping these massive server-wide events that they've mentioned, all the global events, and they are all pretty poor in terms of performance and pretty buggy. And so I wonder if it won't be too long until we see some instance content, maybe some fleet battles that you go into as a group and take on some NPCs for now. Now, the SEAL stuff was really interesting, but again, some very nice slides, but it sounds like a seriously complicated system to work out, and obviously it's going to require base building to be online already, and it's going to require maybe the station stuff as well. So I think this was them just setting out some goals for orgs and for PvP people who want to have a long-term thing to be excited about, but I cannot see this being close in any way. And then when things went really wild, the space station stuff. Now, the first thing they showed us with the space station, you think, well, okay, maybe that's not that crazy. But then as it expands and expands and expands and ends up with you building Bengals, I started to think that I wonder how much of the behind the scenes thinking from a kind of performance point of view, from a server meshing point of view, have they really considered here? Or are they just showing us some really pretty grey box artwork to get us excited for the future? This could take absolutely years to come into the game. Again, the fact that it's grey box says that the artwork is not too far away, but have you considered how many people could be on these space stations? They look absolutely ginormous, and I think there's some serious work on server meshing before this can get anywhere near to being in game. And there's also some serious concerns around client performance, because your own PC at the moment cannot really handle that many ships on screen. Also, there's concerns around how the rule set of this, how many can you build in one location? Will all the planets just be covered in these things? Will certain giant orgs just take over? There's so much to think about. This really looked like very early thinking. It's very exciting, but will it be in game in the next 5 years? I don't really know. Maybe a very basic version. And so I feel like I've depressed myself almost saying this. I'm not normally that pessimistic about this game. I'm quite positive about the long-term future of it, but I do think that is the key word, the long-term future. I think a lot of what they showed us was very early work, and it's going to take a long time before we actually get it in game. And I do think, though, to be more positive, to end on this more positive note, that the patches that we get between now and 1.0, all the 4 dot patches, let's hope we don't get up to 4.24, but I think realistically maybe we will. But I hope and I think that those patches will be good. And now that most of the core tech stuff is done and the server meshing stuff is starting to come online, I think the actual experience of playing the game and having updates come however many times a year CIG will manage it should be much better than what we've had with the 3 dot patches. It will be a better, I'll give it away here, 5 to 8 years than the last 5 to 8 years. 5 years would be incredible to get 1.0 considering how much they've got to do, but would it be shocking if it went 6, 7, 8, even 9 or 10? Would it be crazy? If you've been here since the start, you know that isn't crazy. So yes, more than anything, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments, because I'm just one person. I've looked at a few things there and pulled some conclusions out, but I'd love to know what you think. When do you think 1.0, the released version of the game, the things that Rich Tyler has described there, when do you think that will be in our hands?